Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services, if we can please kindly turn off all cell phones or electronic devices, or please place them on silent. Thank you.
Good afternoon, first of all, and I know that this is a distinguished group of such close friends coming together today with support and lots of love for this precious family here as they face loss of someone so irreplaceably important to them, to you, and to all who had the privilege of knowing and experiencing Anita. I want to also thank my colleagues in the clergy for being here. I know there are a number of you here in support of the family, and your work and your support of the family is certainly deeply valued and appreciated as well. So I'm Rabbi David Englander, together with our Chazan, Lisa Pomerantz-Boro. We have the sad honor of officiating and guiding this service today of honor to Anita's Jewish commitments, his family's rightful expectations, and in hopes that our tradition will guide you toward feeling comforted following significant loss. I had the great honor yesterday of hearing some of your reflections on Anita's life, and all of us today will be really privileged to hear many more memories that will be shared. As I sat in her home at Lionsgate, my vantage point, out of pure coincidence, led me to see two aspects of this beautiful space and to observe them distinctly. One was the beautiful, colorful, and characteristically classy artwork that surrounded us as we spoke. It reminded me of Abraham Joshua Heschel's inspiring statement that you must build your life as if it were a work of art. And Anita, as you know and as you will hear, did just that. Second, I had a view of her refrigerator. I did not look inside, but attached to its door were representations of some of her closely held priorities. Pictures of family, a stylized Jewish star, an Israeli flag, and a magnet from Bethel. Her and your beloved and honored dad's synagogue home for many years. On behalf of Bethel, I affirm that it is our great honor that their names were and will be associated with our congregation, as Anita's legacy will impact many generations. Our amazing Chazan, who has been there for and with this special family for better and for more difficult times, leads our service today of memory in keeping with the Jewish tradition to which Anita was so deeply connected for her whole life.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai rohi lo echsar, binoteshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yanaleini, nafshi ינחני במעגלי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צוררי. דשנת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי. ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. The 23rd Psalm. God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. We are here this afternoon to celebrate the life and the legacy of Anita Farber, to honor her memory, and to hold one another up. If only there were sufficient words to bring comfort to all of you, her beautiful family. We will try today. We will pray for comfort for our shattered hearts. But we are fully aware that there are not words, not really. So we turn to one another in love. We turn to one another when we feel we cannot support ourselves and when we see that someone else needs to be held up. We turn to one another when we need to cry or when we want to tell a funny story. We turn to one another when we don't think we can even breathe, when we need something or someone to hold. Today we will hear stories about your mom, your bubby, from family members and dear friends to whom she was fiercely devoted. Your mom, your bubby. Our friend Anita was a force of nature whose infectious personality and great sense of humor filled the world with radiance and warmth. Those attributes caught the attention of your dad, her Jacobo, when she was only 15 years old. And even though they met while she was at a party with another date, he was clearly smitten right away and knew that very night that he had just met the woman he was going to marry. And you will share more details about that. When Rabbi Englander and I had the good fortune to sit with Ruth and David and Dan yesterday, you described your mom as generous and supportive, which truly comes as no surprise. Your mom and your dad raised you to be mensches, and the values that they instilled in you will live on through you and your children and future generations yet to come as their lasting legacy. No matter what challenges and tragedies you face, and you have had more than your fair share, you continue to serve as role models on how to live with strength, with integrity, and generosity. I could go on and on about your character and your kind hearts. And I know that you credit your parents for blessing you with these gifts. So on behalf of our entire community, I thank you for sharing those blessings with all of us. I will never forget when your dad passed away. And Dan, you called me and said that your family wanted to do something special in his memory. Both he and your mom loved music, and she even painted in her younger years. You wanted to create a lasting, living legacy, something tangible. So we came up with the idea of creating a music room at Bethel, lovingly dedicated in his honor. The walls of the music room are painted with biblical instruments in vibrant, Cuban, if you will, colors. And above the instruments are the notes for Hatikva transcribed, celebrating their love for Israel and Zionism. It is a magnificent space that fills our hearts and our souls with music every single day. What a beautiful treasure. I was honored yesterday to learn about some of your family legends from the angelic firstborn Ruth, from the troublemaker middle child, it's always your fault, David, and the baby, Danny, the apple of your mom's eye. There was the famous cutting of the TV cord, the incident on the golf course with Bessie, and if you don't know, ask David later. The Osito showdown with your mom, which I think she clearly won on that one. And later on, Stacy's famous squirrel fiasco. The three of you shared so many stories with us, and I know that there are many, many more stories that you will continue to share. Your mom worked hard so the three of you could go to KBA, to Camp Ramah, and to Israel, as Jewish education was always a priority. To say that Bubby loved her grandchildren, Rebecca, Jeff and Emily, Zach and Ethan, Drew, it would be an understatement. I know that you all have fond memories of your Bubby that you will share in just a few moments. After your Zeta, her beloved Jacobo passed, life became increasingly difficult for your Bubby. These last 10 years, her health declined rapidly, and these last few weeks were unbearable. This elegant, determined, and feisty woman was no longer able to fight the fight. As her final days on this earth approached, it became clear that the end was in sight. You are blessed that she was able to express her love to you, and I know she felt that love from all of you in return. We sang the Shema together on Monday night, and she left this earth a few hours later, embraced by your love. So we pray for continued comfort and strength for all of you. May you always feel loved and continue to share that love for many years to come. We pray that your mom's memory will inspire all of us to appreciate the small things and to live life to the fullest. May the soul of Chana bat Yitzchak v'Yehudit remain as a source of strength and love. May she rest in peace. And please say with me, Amen. We will now hear from friends and family members. We'll begin with her younger brother, Mark.
Quite a few years ago, I think in 1995, my family was visiting Jacob and Anita at the Jersey Shore. They were renting a house on the shore at the time, a sort of rehearsal for the time when they would finish building a vacation home of their own to make sure that it suited their needs. Our daughter, Paula, was in college at the time and had met a young man who, if I remember correctly, had romantic aspirations. They arranged to have him visit and spend a good part of the day with us in that rented home in the shore. We were milling around the kitchen, talking about something or other, while Anita and Jacob sat in what seemed at the time to be a very distant room elsewhere in the house, when we heard Anita's voice faintly calling for Paula to come. "Oh, a summoner," said our young guest softly. And with that, he captured an essential element of the personality. He was right. Anita summoned people. It's true. She summoned friends and relatives alike to share her space, to be proximate to her in moments of joy and needs. No one who knew Anita would call her a party animal, Lord knows. There was a prudish quality to her as well. But she most certainly was a social being. Family and friends were naturally drawn to her. Otherwise, she drafted them to share her existence, her everyday experiences, which included shopping. As surprising as that may sound to some of you, she savored shopping. And a good price. Inside an Yves Saint Laurent store near us in Vermont, she once stood in the midst of the fluffy, oversized pillows and soft linens and dreamily said to no one in particular, "I could live here." Remember? These and other moments were meant to be shared. Anita was not a loner. She was a joiner. She thrived among people. And it didn't matter whether they were friends or strangers. She engaged them equally. Where did you get that necklace? Those are cute earrings. These were conversations she initiated with strangers at supermarket checkout lines. I know this type of woman. My children know this type of woman. I'm joyfully married to this type of woman. In comparison to her generational peers, my sister had a very brief childhood. By the age of 15, she had met Jacob, and it wasn't too long before they became engaged. And then, for reasons dealing with political developments in Havana, they hastened their marriage date, fearing that the Cuban government would impose severe travel restrictions and that Jacob, who was at the time studying for his doctorate in the US, would not be allowed to leave if he were to visit. And so Anita became a wife and a homemaker as a 17-year-old. Away from her childhood home, she went nearly 2,000 miles to Providence, Rhode Island. In fact, she did not complete her high school degree until later when she took her GED once in the US. We had been raised in an upper middle class home with services that, because of the quite modest wage scales, were available to us, but that are normally associated with relatively high-income households in the US. Things such as private schools, live-in help, domestic services, even nannies. In this environment, the concept of nurturing in children a sense of shared responsibilities by assigning them house chores, whether a boy or a girl, according to the traditions of the day, was laughably foreign to us. And so, into the homemaking world she went. You see where we're going with this. A 17-year-old girl from the subtropics was dropped, so to speak, in a northern climate populated by English speakers residing in structures made of wood and red brick. If you haven't taken up residence in a foreign country, you cannot appreciate the hundreds and hundreds of everyday mundane practices for which you don't have a vocabulary, even if you speak the language. There were moments in this phase of Anita's life where she experienced some of the encounters Audrey Hepburn's character navigated in My Fair Lady. What is this? What do you call that? And what is this for? What we take to be insights that we believe reveal the core beings of others is in fact only a willful construction, a certainty, but only in our imagination. And yet, in the case of Anita, there is an objective truth regarding the course of her development. And it is this. Earlier I said that her childhood had been brief. In the same way that some children skip entire grades, Anita forfeited the phases of the lifespan development that normally accompanies adolescence, the ones that are shared with peers, with other young adults, as we experienced during our years as late teens and 20-somethings. Unlike most of us, Anita was thrust as a teenager into a world populated by adults, men and women who had long navigated past those phases of life. And Anita, by contrast, was left without the full sensory and emotional tools to deal with the complexities of those experiences, the impassioned baggage, the seemingly emotional anarchy that normally accompanies those years. How did she process the life-driven narratives that colored the lives of the much older others that she encountered, and whose married and unmarried lives spoke to years that Anita had not yet and could never have lived? How did Anita translate her observations of behaviors by those she came across when she was herself so far from adulthood? We don't know, but it could not have been easy. It could not have been without inner conflict. As she developed all these struggles, she did so without support of family. And into this living, learning laboratory of a household, very much within a still evolving marriage, I appear. A 12-year-old boy is brought in to live with his 17-year-old sister in a new land. This is the stuff we read about in history books about European immigrants in the 19th century. Adjustments needed to be made. Sibling relationships can be complicated things. The 12-year-old boy couldn't easily take up the role of a son. And the 17-year-old girl could hardly have been expected to convert effortlessly into anybody's mother. Perhaps it stands as a metaphor for such stormy transitions that not long after I arrived at Anita's home, she set fire to the kitchen by reportedly absent-mindedly leaving burning candles right up against painted wooden cabinets. No one was hurt. But the summoner, the one who summoned me from my childhood home to a very different one, also summoned the will, the strength, and the determination to see the experiment of raising me to its successful conclusion. And for the next 5 years, the seeming fog of war that is peculiar to adolescent relationships, we each found our ways to develop through an unrehearsable learning process into our respective roles as adults. In the end, we turned out to be better than okay. This was the result, in no small measure, to a personality trait that would not abide being alone or leaving you alone, to an insistence in keeping people around her close, to a determined spirit that would inhabit them, so that she left you with a sense that hers was a presence that was special, not common, and not easily recognized in other people we've known. So thank you, Anita. In return for your insistence on being part of me, you will continue to summon my love and gratitude just for insisting that I be with you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And our condolences go to you and to Lenore and to Paula and Jeffrey. It's my honor now to call Veda Light, Anita's dear friend, to share some words.
It is hard to believe that a half a century passed since that summer afternoon when I received a call from Pearl Greca inviting me to come over and meet one of our neighbors. "You will like Anita," she said. "She's even more Jewish than you." That was the beginning of an instant friendship, deep and lifelong. Anita's Yiddishkeit was the initial draw. I felt a kinship with her that emanated from the similarity of our backgrounds, even though I grew up in Israel and she grew up in Cuba. She also filled a certain void that I was experiencing, caused by hanging out with too many musicians. It was refreshing. But I was soon to learn that Anita was a force. She was an institution, complete with a strong personality, countless friends, and a heart of gold. Anita cared passionately about everything. She cared about every morsel of food that went into Jacob's mouth. She cared about her heritage, and she cared about whether her legendary flan came out okay. She cared about the welfare of her family and of strangers. She cared about Bethel and the Kelman Academy. She was fiercely loyal to her family and her friends, and she earned their loyalty. Her deep love for her Jacobo was so touching. And of course, the children and the grandchildren were her raison d'etre. There was never a conversation when she did not brag about the children or inquire about my children and grandchildren, and she delighted in any stories I could tell her about them. She was never indifferent. She was generous with charitable contributions, but insisted on bargain prices for her very purchases. She would react with indiscriminate horror to every little mishap, but she was heroic in the face of real adversity. I will never forget her grace and courage when David went through the horror of Guillain-Barré and when Jacob battled his illness. And ultimately, she was perfectly capable of laughing at herself, particularly when her brother Mark delighted in needling her, which was at every given opportunity except today, Mark. This was the first time I heard you speak when you did not say anything derogatory or funny. I hope she hears that. Anita was capable of talking you into anything. She even convinced me, and don't ask me how, to take sewing lessons with her. Imagine? Neither one of us rocked the fashion world or created anything that was deemed wearable in public, but we had so much fun laughing at each other. Our decades of breaking the fast with the Greca family, which started with 3 couples and young kids and mushroomed to 25 to 30 people as our families grew, were one of my most cherished traditions that I always looked forward to and will sorely miss. I always admired Anita's impeccable taste. Her clothes were elegant, her jewelry artistic, and it was always fun to look at her art purchases, which were many when she traveled. I guess what appealed to me the most in Anita was her Heimischkeit. Not really translatable into English, but meaning a homey warmth. She defined that word and brought me close to my original roots and my original family whenever I visited her. I will miss that Heimische feeling. It touched me deeply and was a source of comfort that I will always remember. Anita, rest in peace. I will always be grateful for our friendship. And when you are united with your beloved Jacobo, don't forget to make sure that he doesn't eat too much cheese.
Thank you so much. What an honor. Thank you, Veda, and our condolences to you and to Herb on this tremendous loss. 5 lucky grandchildren are going to come up. We're going to go in age order, starting with Rebecca and Jeffrey. Okay, in case you don't know the order, then it will be Drew, and then it will be Zach and Ethan.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are Rebecca and Jeffrey Horowitz, Anita's 2 eldest grandchildren, as Hazan rightly pointed out, in my case, by a mere 3 weeks.
We were extremely lucky to grow up with a bubby who not only thought we were perfect, but was an active participant in our lives. I'm told that she wore a black and white sweater to the hospital when I was born, because babies only see black and white.
Despite our parents' decision to have a body of water and a toll bridge between them and their parents, that did not deter Bubby from coming to us weekly to pick us up at school, drive us to activities, and stop for a snack at Barson's Deli or IHOP, where I could sit by the window and count the yellow cars. In addition to the weekly routine, she never missed a school event or performance. Just 2 weeks ago, when she was being transferred to Rebecca's floor at Jefferson, I joked with Rebecca to enjoy Grandparents' Day at work.
When I came home from ballet class, having learned this fun jelly roll game, she joined me on the floor and rolled around on the carpet. She was always the one to say yes, whenever we wanted to play a game, do an activity, or just spend time together, and certainly never turned down an Eskimo kiss. Being proud Jubans, Bubby and Zeta tried to teach us Spanish by asking us what words we wanted to learn. Unfortunately, 5 or 6-year-old Jeff was only interested in learning how to say poopy and stupid, so that lesson quickly ended. They were so proud when we took Spanish in school, even though it meant they lost their secret code.
Bubby and Zeta loved to travel. Whenever they went on a trip, they brought back gifts for all of their grandchildren. These presents were typically t-shirts, often matching, and even more often in the wrong sizes. Almost every time we've traveled, Bubby had a recommendation of something to do or see or eat or shop, even in places she hadn't been to since the 80s. In addition to her travels, she loved her food. As my mother likes to say, she would eat anything that didn't walk off her plate. A few years back, when Rebecca and I took her to dinner at the beach, she was very excited that they had langoustines on special, which she neglected to realize were shelled and with her eyesight would be difficult to eat. Thus, I spent most of the meal cracking and peeling her food. When driving for ice cream an hour later, she looked at me out of the blue and said, "How much did they charge me to make my own meal?"
Bubby was always interested in any and every aspect of our lives. Our phone conversations with her in the last few years were characterized by her asking, "What else?" And after we'd given a detailed report, saying, "I don't think I'll remember that." After we found something else to tell her, or Jeff provided her with his next month's worth of personal and work travel, she would promptly ask, "How am I supposed to remember all that?"
From the day I introduced Emily to Bubby and Zeta, Bubby welcomed her into our family as if she were her own grandchild, and very happily referred to her as, quote, "my bride," since the moment we got engaged. There was no one more excited about our wedding day than Bubby, despite us springing on her just minutes before the processional that she would both be walking down the aisle with her brother and reading one of the 7 blessings. She was beaming all night long, at least until a few people who will go unnamed attempted to lift her wheelchair during the hora. When the china she bought us as a wedding gift arrived, we told her that we had exciting news. Without hesitation, a big shit-eating grin appeared on her face as she said, "You're pregnant." We all couldn't stop laughing, and to her dismay, that is still not a thing.
We will always be grateful for the memories we had with Bubby and how fortunate we were to have her as an integral part of our childhoods and our biggest cheerleader as we have grown into adults.
Bubby, we love you lots of, and love you more.
Hello, everybody. Most people will know my Bubby as a homemaker, as she spent most of her adult life raising my aunt, my uncle, and my dad. And while that is absolutely true, I know there was more to my grandmother. I was lucky enough to do a school project on her and learn more about when she moved to the States with my Zadie. As Mark had said, they moved to Rhode Island. They left Cuba right before Castro took power. But instead of following the stereotype of moving to Miami or some other place in Florida, they did end up in Providence. Once they arrived and settled into their new home, my Bubby started working as a teacher. Now, I know most of you are probably thinking along the same lines as me, and that she taught Spanish. Nope. She actually taught math. And I had to do a double take when she told me this, as my grandfather was the one who obtained the PhD in mathematics from Brown. I swore she was going to tell me Spanish because she spoke it so well. I remember once going in a car ride with her and my dad, and she was on the phone speaking to my grandfather in Spanish, and I could only understand 5 words. David, Drew, bus. And so, just like Jeff and Rebecca, years later in high school, I would take Spanish classes, wanting to be able to connect with my grandparents while also wanting to know what they were saying from time to time. However, I soon learned that I couldn't go to my grandmother for Spanish help. And that was because she couldn't help me, not because she couldn't help me, but because she was too advanced. She would look at the textbook and say that it was incorrect and proceed to show me the correct way. She'd proofread my essays and presentations as she was the expert. I'm thankful to have been able to travel both abroad and within the U.S. with her. We've had family trips down to the shore in Puerto Rico, Scottsdale, Arizona, Orlando, Florida, and even Cuba to visit where her and my grandfather grew up. You could also expect after every trip that she took to have a Hard Rock shirt waiting for you when she would get back from each destination. She was able to experience everything the world had to offer and more. Clearly, she lived an amazing life, but she wasn't just my Bubby. My cousins and I are lucky to be able to call her our Bubby, but many family friends got to call her Bubby too. She made everybody feel as if they were family and didn't care if you technically weren't one of hers. I know she'll take care of all of the Farbers and Horowitzes and Schuckmans and everybody else that she welcomed into her life over the years from above. Thank you.
For those of you who know me, the ability to talk about something for hours on end has rarely been an issue, a common trait in the Farber, Schuckman, and Horowitz families. But when it came to figuring out what I wanted to say today, I found myself with a bit of writer's block. Not for a lack of sentiments, but because of the boundless love, memories, and virtues personified by our Bubby. The last decade, following the loss of our Zeta, presented her with many challenges. Her Parkinson's progressed and her outward demeanor had changed a bit. But despite what may have been on the surface, her true self, the warm, witty, loving, and tenacious Bubby we all knew, never truly dimmed. As Azan put earlier, Bubby was a force of nature. Party Bubby, a nickname given by some of my older cousins, never really left us. Regular Bubby was the day-to-day, but Party Bubby was still in there with the fire. To me, her love was straightforward but limitless. Whether it was through her telling us that she loves us lots or rubbing our shoulders with a heartfelt massage, the encompassing love and warmth she had for all of us was boundless. Throughout the years, it became clear to me that certain things in life were very important to Bubby, and those were culture, education, identity, and the importance of meaningful relationships and giving back to others. And also that I learned today, shopping. If one could encapsulate a lifetime in stories, Bubby's life would span several volumes. At her core, she was a storyteller. Her tales woven from a life so rich, it felt as though she'd live 1,000 different lives in just 82 years. Bubby had a way of making every moment feel monumental, as if each story were a lifetime unto itself. And she wasn't just a storyteller, she was also a teacher. Her extensive collection of art and art books, her love for the orchestra and taking us to many shows, and even our Skype calls to family in Israel were just some of the ways she taught us to appreciate the broader world around us. As far as identity and culture were concerned, Bubby was a living bridge to our Jewish and Cuban roots. We had a small ritual, my Bubby and I, in our old bedroom on Country Club Drive. We would sit on her bed with a notebook, and she would have me pick things around the room. Then she would write them down and teach me the Spanish word for each of them. There she might have taught me just Spanish words, but it was much more than language lessons. It was in those moments she taught me that at the end of the day, the things that no one can take from you are your identity and your knowledge. To be truthful, I didn't fully appreciate the gravity of these lessons then at just 10 years old. But today, they stand as some of the most poignant memories I have of her. Bubby's love was not necessarily always declared through grand gestures, but also through simple, everyday acts. For me, this was most evident in the kitchen. The smell of picadillo wafting through the house, the sound of her laughter as we'd cook flan together. These aren't just memories, they're legacies. I fondly remember the home movie her, my Zeta, and I made when preparing copious amounts of haroset for the Passover Seder. I learned much more than recipes in that kitchen. I learned values, the importance of family, and the joy of simple pleasures. It was there among the mixing bowls and measuring cups that her life lessons seeped into me. Our roles eventually evolved in the kitchen over time. It went from her making a roast con pollo and meatloaf with a ketchup-drawn Z on top to me cooking for her, a time together that I always thoroughly enjoyed. I remember her eyes lighting up, a smile stretching across her face when I cooked her dinner for her. It reminded me of the times that she lovingly prepared meals for all of us when we were younger. She gave so much to everyone around her, always wanting the best for those and those she loved. I think of dinners when I made her picadillo or scallops, sorry, Rabbi, and she'd take a sip of her wine or whatever drink she had, giggle, and charmingly announce, "Oops, I'm drunk." Maybe her susceptibility to alcohol was due to the Parkinson's meds, but that moment always ended with her wearing a big smile, perhaps dozing at the table, but surely sleeping that night with a belly full of good food and head filled with happy memories. Not to be forgotten are the many sleepovers at Bubby and Zeta's house, the scarves and blankets she knitted for us over the years, the winter sliding down the golf course behind her house followed by a hot chocolate or soup to warm us, and even my business venture called Bubby Tech Support that I started after Drew and Jeffrey went to college. I had only one client, but maintained my 5-star rating over the years. Ethan and I were the babies of the grandchildren, and we thoroughly cherished that special bond we shared with her as her grandbabies, just as my dad is the baby of his siblings. No matter how she viewed herself in her later years, she remained unchangeably our Bubby. So here we are, both celebrating and mourning a life so vividly lived. I know we're all here today with heavy hearts, but also I hope with gratitude. Gratitude for the life she led and the love she freely gave to everyone around her. The void she leaves is certainly palpable, and yet what she's imparted to us, values, memories, love, is a lifetime worth of riches. Rest in peace, Bubby. Your spirit is forever imprinted on our hearts. We'll forever miss and love you. Lots of, lots of, lots of.
As a brief addendum. Last night Zach was kind of driving me home from school, and I was writing some of the stuff down that I was gonna miss about my Bubby, and I realized that the first 5 or 6 things combined were food related. Well, obviously that's not all I remember her by. I think it does encapsulate who she was as a person, and that was a giver. A giver of course, good meals and 2 cents, but also of kindness, laughter, love, family, community. I always said these past couple of years what I would give for just one more conversation with my grandfather, Jacob. And now I have to say that about you, but so, Bubby, love you so much. I know that you're looking down on us, grandchildren who all spoke so beautifully today, and we will make you proud for all that you have given us and the lives that you built for us. So I hope that you and Zeta are looking down on us with pride and joy and cheese. I love you, Bubby. My Bubster, my Bubbinator. When calling her on Siri, Bob. When going mobile, precious cargo. I love you, Bubby, to the end of the line.
Exquisite grandchildren. Thank you. Finally, we'll call Ruth and David and Dan.
think I should have gone before them. Okay. I give this eulogy on behalf of myself and my brothers, David and Danny. It is a compilation of all our thoughts, feelings, and memories. Our mother was, in many ways, larger than life. She knew how to make an entrance. She truly sparkled. She had a great, mischievous smile and loved to banter and tease. Those of you who came to know Mom in the 10 years since our dad passed, a period during which her grief was often overwhelming and during which she faced significant health challenges, may have experienced her as reserved and even melancholy. We want you to know that Anita, in her prime, was quite the opposite. She was fun to be around, vivacious, charming, and beautiful. She had a perpetual twinkle in her eye and an air of elegance and grace. In a word, she knew how to carry herself. She had a great sense of humor, often delivered in a deadpan style. When the joke landed, her face would light up. While Mom was usually dressed in the latest fashion, we would not describe her as a modern woman. At her core, she was a traditionalist. She was defined by a deep commitment to family, education, hard work, Judaism, and Israel. She was deeply devoted to her children and her grandchildren, but not necessarily in that order. As she fiercely defended her grandchildren, regardless of the merits, we were reminded of the old joke about the definition of Jewish grandchildren: geniuses being raised by idiots. To what can we attribute this unique combination of fun, fashion, and flamboyance on the one hand, and commitment to tradition on the other hand? Her upbringing in Havana, Cuba surely played a major part. Anita was born on December 7th, 1942. Her parents had emigrated from what was then Poland and met and married in Cuba. Her parents worked together in their own business, a tourist shop in the center of Havana. Anita was an only child until the age of 5.5, when her brother Mark came along. She went to the American school where she studied in Spanish and English, fortuitous given the course her life was to take. At age 10, she joined the local youth Zionist group. Her parents, Ida and Isaac, quickly came to regret their decision to enroll her. Anita adopted the cause wholeheartedly. She passionately and incessantly lobbied for the family to make Aliyah. Ida and Isaac only managed to quiet the chatter by transitioning her away from that group and into others. Still, the seed had been planted. Anita remained, for all of her 80 years, a fervent Zionist and a lover of all things Israeli. Throughout her life, she was in constant contact with her cousins in Israel, who emigrated there from Poland in the 1930s. These cousins and the State of Israel were an integral part of her life. Havana had a small, tight-knit Jewish community. The social life was insular and revolved around the synagogue and community center. The vibe was both traditional Judaism and Latin salsa. When Anita was 15.5 years old, she met the love of her life, our father Jacob, at a dance. Neither Match.com nor Coffee Meets Bagel were required. The dance was held at the famous nightclub, the Copacabana, not your standard USY or equivalent venue. Jacob, 6 years older than Anita and already studying in the United States, was home for a visit. Jacob's date was the sister of Anita's date. The poor siblings got little to no attention that evening. The chemistry between Anita and Jacob was present from the moment they met. Jacob went home that evening and told his older sister Esther that he had met the woman he was going to marry. Their marriage was inevitable from early on, but none other than Fidel Castro accelerated the process. After Castro came to power, much of the Jewish community was scrambling to leave the country. The elaborate large wedding that Anita and Ida had envisioned became a lovely small wedding at the Delano Hotel in Miami Beach on May 29, 1960. Just as an aside, Anita did finally get her dream wedding when Rick and I got married 25 years later. Mom planned every detail of our wedding, only rarely asking for our input. But back to 1960. Shortly after their wedding, Anita and Jacob moved to Providence, Rhode Island, where Jacob was studying. Being a 17-year-old bride suddenly living in a new country would have been on its own a challenge. To raise the degree of difficulty, as you heard, my Uncle Mark at age 12 came to live with them in Providence, and then I was born a year later, just before Anita's 19th birthday. Mark lived with my parents until he started college. That shared experience, while not always easy, forged a deep bond between my mom and her brother Mark. Mark, his wife Lenore, and their children Paula and Jeffrey were always so special and so important to our mother. After my father finished his PhD, a job at RCA brought the family to Cherry Hill, where Anita lived the rest of her life. David and Danny arrived in those years, completing our family. Anita was a stay-at-home mom with a brief career as an Avon rep and an equally brief career as a travel agent. In many ways, she lived a typical 1970s suburban mom life, shuttling us in her station wagon from activity to activity, commandeering the home front, and volunteering in the Jewish community. Our parents worked hard to ensure that we could go to Jewish day school and summer camp. Our family road trips were usually to Miami Beach to visit the grandparents. I have been fortunate to have never been uprooted from my home country. However, sitting in a middle seat between my two brothers to keep them from fighting on a 2-day drive to Florida may have been a close second in terms of overcoming adversity. Our parents, from a very young age, grew up and matured together. Both being strong-willed and passionate, their voices from time to time were raised. Our house was full of love, but was not always quiet. Ay, Jacobo, whether directed at his food choices, his attire, or a variety of other sins, was heard quite often. They loved each other deeply, but in a Lucy and Desi kind of way. Mom encouraged and supported Dad in all he undertook, as he did her. She even listened with an appreciative ear to his musical compositions, which was perhaps her most selfless act as a wife. In turn, Jacob never lost his deep adoration for Anita, the same adoration that led him to predict a life together after their first meeting. In advance of Danny and Stacy's wedding, Anita, dress shopping, tried on a sexy, low-cut dress for Jacob. Anita questioned the propriety of the dress for the occasion. Jacob simply said, "When you have it, flaunt it." The dress was bought and worn. Another demonstration of Dad's commitment to Mom was the surprise 40th birthday party he threw for her. The only wrinkle was the letter from the country club to Mom thanking her for holding her surprise 40th birthday party at the club. The letter was received by her well in advance of the party. Mom should have been nominated for an Oscar. She kept the letter to herself until after the party and played the part of the surprise guest of honor with aplomb. In addition to her family and her faith, our mother loved art and classical music. She and our dad had Philadelphia Orchestra tickets for many years. Two of their closest friends, Larry Grieca of blessed memory and Herb Light, were violinists in the orchestra. Mom also loved collecting contemporary crafts. Every year she would come back from the Philadelphia Museum of Art craft show with new jewelry and would ask me if I liked it. I would say that it was interesting, and she would say, "Well, don't throw this away." She also liked to buy decorative pieces in triplicate for all of our homes. Our parents loved to travel, and a particular highlight was a family trip to Cuba in 2012. Mom and Dad, David, Danny, and I, together with our spouses and children, all traveled together to Havana. Mom and Dad had come full circle. They never expected to be able to tour the places of their childhood and teenage years, their homes, schools, and synagogues, with their children and grandchildren. We had the opportunity to see the love they had for the country of their birth and the role that it played in their development and character. While Mom on occasion demonstrated a deep expertise in the art of Jewish guilt, she was a proud, engaged, and supportive mother and grandmother. She had high expectations, as she should have, and passed those expectations on to her children and grandchildren. That commitment, that pride, and those standards also applied to her children's partners, who she treated as her own, or perhaps better than her own. It is a daunting task to summarize a life in a short or perhaps not so short eulogy. Our mom's life was a life well lived. She overcame many obstacles. Together with our father, she built a loving and committed family, was a great friend to many, was a contributor to her community, and leaves a legacy of values and tradition to and for her children and grandchildren. And we know that she is now reunited with Dad, dancing to Cuban music and dining on picadillo, arroz con pollo, and flan. May her memory be an inspiration for our children, and may her memory always be for a blessing. We love you, Mom.
Thank you all for those beautiful tributes and memories. Once again, our condolences to Ruth and Rick, and to David, and to Dan and Stacy. We also want to extend our condolences to Sam Farber and Selma Marks, and to nephew Reuben Perlmutter. The family would also like to express their gratitude to Anita's incredible aides. I don't know where you are. To Mary Johnson, Daisy Montenegro, and Kay Burrow. They are incredibly grateful for your love and support. Following our service this afternoon, interment will take place at Locustwood Cemetery, and after the burial, everyone is invited back to Congregation Bethel, 8000 Main Street in Voorhees, for dinner with the family. The family will be receiving visitors tonight and tomorrow night at 7 p.m. with services at 7:30 p.m. at Bethel in the garden room. Please rise in body or spirit for the memorial prayer. El male rachamim, shochen bamromim, hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanefei hashechina, b'malot kedoshim u'tehorim, כזוהר הרקיע מהזהירים, את נשמת חנה בת יצחק ויהודית, שהלכה לעולמה, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה. אנא ברחמים, אז תראה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור חיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום המשכבה, ונאמר אמן.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Anita Farber, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And we say, Amen. I invite you to be seated for another few moments.
And I'll ask if we can rise once more, please. Folks in this room?